So joining us now, the Florida firebrand himself, the one and only MAGA superstar, Congressman Matt Gaetz. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Oh, thank you, Kimberly. And it seems like it's quite the lawyer nerd out that we have.
I know.
Dershowitz, Gaetz, we can really get into this and talk about the challenges.
It's really true. So you had one of the best tweets. This is no surprise, right? Fantastic with the tweets that you put out on this, writing, quote, "Imagine being naive enough to believe that the Biden bribe evidence and Trump indictment happening the same day was a coincidence." Lay out what you were thinking and talk about what's behind this with Merrick Garland's scheme. What's he got going on here?
Well, there's really two problems at the Department of Justice. One is that they accelerate anything that could be in any way harmful or negative to President Trump, his family, his supporters. And on the other hand, they actually function as plumbers for the Biden family. They try to discredit any negative information that comes in as foreign influence, even though oftentimes it's just very probative as to the compromise that exists over the first family. So here you have this remarkable scene play out where on the eve of FBI Director Christopher Wray being held in contempt of Congress, they turn over the evidence showcasing a bribery scheme, not just with Hunter Biden or Frank Biden or other Biden family members, which we've proven before, but specifically implicating Joe Biden. And reasonable people might ask, well, if a trusted FBI source brought this in, why was it not developed? Why was there no follow through? Why was there no investigation? Because if they just heard an anonymous whisper that Donald Trump had taken a bribe, well, you know that the full force of the federal government 100%. Would be weaponized against him. And when you're thinking about the Espionage Act, this is Woodrow Wilson's Espionage Act. This was intended in an era of global conflict to try to deter people from selling stuff to our adversaries. So when it comes to the Espionage Act, I think this indictment vastly underperforms kind of the stated purpose and the underlying principle that undergirds the Espionage Act. And it is glaring in its omission, as you stated brilliantly in your monologue, as to the Presidential Records Act. When you have the most operative statute that governs how these things are to be resolved administratively, not through criminal process, and you just lay that aside, I think it showcases a real weakness in Jack Smith's case. Another thing I found interesting, and I really wanted to talk to you about this, Kimberly, the mention of Hillary Clinton in the indictment.
Right.
I never would have believed that it would have been the DOJ and the government itself wanting to make reference to Hillary Clinton in this case, because it gives President Trump's legal team the ability to conduct a great deal of discovery on how Hillary Clinton was treated and potentially even put before the jury these things. Now, normally a judge might say that is outside of the scope of these charges, but when you have the charging instrument referencing Hillary Clinton, yeah, don't you think that's a big mistake?
Huge deal, because he's able to then go in and get any kind of discovery, like you say. They can try to compel her testimony, bring her forward in front of a jury. I'm looking beyond that, and I say to myself, why did they do that? Why did they do that?
I think they couldn't help themselves. Like, there's references to statements President Trump made on the campaign, which I think Jack Smith, in a very myopic view, interprets as some sort of, binding paradigm vis-a-vis classified documents. Keep in mind, Joe Biden has had classified documents in his garage since 1974, and no one really thinks he's going to be charged with any criminal violation as a consequence. But I think sometimes they really can't help themselves, and it really exposes what the true motivation and intent is. And in a lot of ways, isn't that President Trump's superpower? Like, whether it was the original sin of the Russia hoax or this nonsense about Ukraine, President Trump has a unique ability to showcase the changes that we need by drawing fire himself personally. And I hate that he has to go through that his family has to go through that. But in a way, we may come out a stronger country being able to identify where there are these nodes of corruption and improper influence that otherwise have thrived in Washington, D.C. under Republicans and Democrats.
It's really true. But when you look at this, the whole thing, and you get some elevation on it, we've heard the Democrats scream up and down the street about election interference time and time again. But of course, what they accuse, and we find this every time, Donald Trump of, is exactly what they're actually doing themselves. So what do we see as like kind of the next steps for the weaponization committee to try to combat this?
Well, Chairman Jordan, as you pointed out, wants to know, what the scope is of this. Is this just a fishing expedition? We're going to be requesting information regarding the people on Jack Smith's team. Remember, the Mueller team was chock full of people with a partisan axe to grind. It certainly seems with Jack Smith and some of the associations he has that we may see that very same thing manifest here in this case. And so we're going to be looking at those things very closely. But I've got to tip my hat to my colleague, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Today, she announced that she is putting in an appropriations restriction on any money to Jack Smith, and she is working to garner support for that. And in a way, it is a flex of Article 1 powers. Congress is organized under Article 1. We have the power of the purse. In a lot of ways, we're the first among equals in the three branches of government, and we should start acting like it. And so I am in full support of the prohibition on funds to this terrible political prosecution that Marjorie Taylor Greene has advanced. And here we sit, Kim, on the eve of President Trump showing up at a federal courthouse in Miami. I think back to being a kid and seeing Manuel Noriega, the former Panamanian dictator, dragged to the federal courthouse in Miami. But the irony here is it's the United States that's looking like the Banana Republic.
It really is. It's unbelievable. It's like you woke up like, Rumpelstiltskin. You're like, wait a second, what's happening here? Can I get my America back? It was so just, I had to take a moment just seeing when President Trump, landed Miami. You see his plane going through, and you can't imagine, like, what is this happening again? First with New York, and obviously first going back to the Mar-a-Lago raid. Now this, what he has to be subjected to. I'll be with him tomorrow when he flies back. We'll be waiting there for him in Bedminster, where he will address the country and the world, quite frankly, about what goes on. But he has incredible strength to be able to get through this. But like we say it all the time, it's like they're only after him because they're after us. And, if they can do this to the 45th president of the United States, by the way, factually innocent, and pulling out this antiquated Espionage Act to try to bootstrap in, really circumventing and steamrolling right through the Presidential Records Act, where he is fully entitled to do what he did, declassify documents, retain, etc. They can do it to anybody. They can do it to anybody. We've all seen it. You've seen when they try to come after you with lies and fabrication. It's out of control, but we've got to do something about it. I love the fact that you're saying, yes, let's do what we have the right to do. Use the power of the purse. Like, shut it down. Cut off the head of the snake. Don't let them have the money, the funds, to be able to continue to use this lawfare to weaponize against the president, weaponize against American, citizens. So I'm with you on that. So go MTG, because she don't care what they say about her. She's just like, let's just go. She's a female honey badger. You're the male one. All right. So the more we kind of look at all of this, it looks like a total setup, right? Because you got past presidents, along with Joe Biden. They have all had, you saw a little thing in the opening monologue with Corvette Summer, where he was keeping the documents with trustee Hunter in the House. They've all had classified records, but no indictment. Yet now they're only going after President Trump. It's a totally different story whenever it's President Trump. How are they going to even justify this? The documents that Joe Biden had, he wasn't protected by the Presidential Records Act. That all, predates this.
In a just world, I think we could all, Republican and Democrat, look at this situation and say, we probably need a better way to do this. We haven't reformed this system in the digital era. I think that creating repositories where, while these things are being negotiated, they can be worked through is an appropriate area for legislative review. And there may even be some administrative actions that can be taken so that there's not the very confusion that seems to have emerged vis-a-vis President Obama, President Bill Clinton in his sock drawer, Joe Biden, Vice President Pence, President Trump. But President Trump is being singled out for basically two reasons, and you and I know them. He's running for president, and he's winning. And if either of those weren't the case, then we wouldn't be here. And it's precisely because they fear the American people continuing to get a seat at the table in a Trump administration, and they want to exclude that. And so they're using this extreme tool. But I think the ultimate verdict will be issued in the election. And the primary election is one that seems to be getting better and better in outlook for President Trump. The more people seem to be coming after him in this way. Just saw recent polling showing him, now moving well north of 60% of the vote in the very, very divided Republican primary field. And I think people are starting to wake up, and these actions are drawing into sharp relief the fight we are in. And
I mean,
it's
it's
like Tim
backfiring.
Scott. We love Tim Scott. Tim Scott's
Sure.
a nice guy. We'd
Great
hang
guy.
out with Tim Scott. But like for this precise moment, he's not the guy that can be president. Donald
No.
Trump has to be president because of what we are facing.
Well, that's true, and that's the thing. There's nice people in there. You know, Tim Scott's a great guy. You know, Nikki Haley, a lot of people kind of like her. You know, from a more like mainstream Republican, perspective. But it's not about that. It's about who's the best and right choice. Like, why wouldn't you, if Michael Jordan is willing to play and he's in his prime? I don't think you bench him. I don't know.
I would take Michael Jordan after his prime.
By the way, I
Michael
take him right
Jordan
now.
post-prime
Yeah.
was better than a lot of people.
It's really true. And so, for me, when people talk about it, it's like, okay, that's great. But how about those guys in like 2028 or something like that? Because this is so bad what's happening now. And like we need to have a serious majority, in the House, right, in Congress. We need to have the majority in the Senate, and we need a strong America First Republican, not a rhino, in the White House to get this done.
You and I both know nothing ever really happens in this town without presidential leadership.
True.
Presidential leadership drives anything that is consequential. And when we look at the consequential fights we're in, we know that with President Trump, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to imagine what his policies will be. We saw them on the border. They worked. We saw them in the economy. We were thriving. And I think people want to get back to that. And maybe now I would speak to those viewers who maybe you don't like President Trump. Maybe you don't like the mean tweets. Maybe you don't like the brash attitude. But even if you don't like it, you need it. You need it for the sake of your family and your job and your future and your country. And that is, I think, what is going to really define the contours of this race. And I think it's why you see Jack Smith engaging in these very aggressive actions. And for Joe Biden to be cast in the world now as a guy trying to jail his primary political rival, it undermines our nation going forward. And frankly, I think the stain's going to be pretty hard to get out. I mean, even after Joe Biden is a distant memory, I think that despots and dictators throughout the world for 20 years may point to this action by Joe Biden to justify really brutal actions against political opponents and really terrible endeavors of repression, and that blood will be on Joe Biden's hands.
Yeah, I really think so. I think you're absolutely right. And when you really think about what you said, he's trying to jail his primary political rival. Like, put him in jail. Take the will of the people away from them and decide himself, essentially Joe Biden emperor, like just eliminate Trump. It really shocks the conscience, quite frankly. But I want to talk a little bit more about this Espionage Act, because I want to know if you can do anything about this, Matthew. Should Congress actually step in to maybe rewrite this Espionage Act? Because you would find that they use these like antiquated laws, et cetera, and then try to weaponize them, doing these loopholes. It just seems to me that it's sort of a scary, perilous path if this precedent is being established and weaponizing this act to be able to go after political opponents. And it's remarkably broad.
It's a great point. I mean, again, this is the Woodrow Wilson era Espionage Act. And if you take the Jack Smith interpretation of the Espionage Act to its full and fulsome conclusion, no president will ever declassify anything on the way out of office, because even if you declassify something, you could get hauled back before some court by some political rival, not just the following year, but 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And so it limits the ability for presidents to be able to utilize the powers that are fully vested within Article 2. So in a way, this interpretation as applied of the Espionage Act is anti-constitutional. And I think that would certainly summon the need for some reform to the law. You and I both know there are a lot of intelligence authorities that need to be looked at and revised. And I look at the 702 authorities that were used in the Russia hoax, which is really, the Russia hoax is the original sin of all of this. It's what really launches this persecution of Trump. And they're humiliated, by the way, at how bad the Russia hoax went. And that's a part of this too. Anyone would be naive not to think so. But they use these authorities, these 702 FISA authorities, and I want to make very clear on the record on your program, I will not vote to reauthorize those authorities. They expire this year, and they ought to be in the dustbin of history. Do
you think we have the support and the votes in Congress to do away with it?
We've got friends who are in the national security, space, and I'm on the Armed Services Committee, so I understand we have enemies around the world. But pursuant to these authorities, the FBI did over 1 million illegal searches. They did an illegal search. Like, they did 38 of them every hour.
That's insane.
Like, over the period of time that the Inspector General reviewed. And
what
this
an abuse of power.
He's saying it's not Jim Jordan saying it. It's the Obama-appointed Inspector General of the Department of Justice. So they've broken bad over there. And I want an FBI and a DOJ that is constrained by the Constitution and serving the people. We haven't had that in a while, though.
That's a big overhaul that needs to happen. That is an absolute fact. And we'll start with the 7th floor over there with the FBI. But I want to talk to you really quick about this because, you know, burying the lead of all of this is we should be sitting there calling for impeachment for Joe Biden with this whole developing, bribery scandal. So, he apparently just gets a pass. That news comes out, like you said, no coincidence that then they go ahead and release this and go after Trump. Tell us what's the very latest with this Biden's alleged role in foreign briberies.
So there's two questions. One is, was the bribe actually consummated? We have that allegation from a highly trusted source. I think there's more spade work to be done to trace down those financial records and to really assess that. What we know is nobody pays a bribe for nothing, right? There's always a deliverable, and the deliverable happened, which was the firing of the prosecutor that these people wanted fired in exchange for this bribe money. So that is very strong circumstantial evidence, but you got to have it airtight and you got to go look at the bank records. So that work is ongoing as we speak right now. But the second thing that we can't lose sight of, even if the bribe was never consummated, there is a cover-up at play here because this source information was just immediately put to the side and it never led to evidentiary development, law enforcement work, the impaneling of grand juries, all the things that would happen if this was someone named Trump. So it's not just the crime of the bribe, it's also the cover-up. We have two parallel investigations going right now into those matters.
I'm very optimistic about that, and I think it's extremely important. It's for the integrity of our system and for, American jurisprudence and democracy, quite frankly. All right, let's talk about the GOP primary real quick before we have to let you go. How do you think all of this affects it? I mean, we see Trump's poll numbers are up, so it's backfiring, and they're making him the braveheart of, the political movement and with the persecution of him. But how do you see it in terms of the other candidates, the other people running, and ultimately, what does this do for us with the general election, since now all this focus is here on the primary?
People always try to game out elections in advance. I've been on the ballot, I think, every 2 years since 2010. And what I can tell you is you have to win one election at a time. And the primary contest is what comes first. And that ought to be our focus right now. And in that primary contest, I can only imagine how frustrating it is for everyone else running that they're not really going to be able to break through the ubiquity of the Trump coverage.
Right.
And whether it's for that which is deeply unfair or deeply troubling to people, it is coverage nonetheless. So I've seen in recent polls the president gaining ground. I actually don't think he's crested yet. I think toward the end of this week, early next week, we're going to see the president in the mid-60s in a lot of these places. That would be a high watermark, and it would also be really historic just given the number of people running. I mean, everybody who runs for president has 10 or 20 friends, except maybe like Mike Pence, but almost the rest of them do. And in that, type of a competitive dynamic, the way President Trump is consolidating the Republican primary vote certainly makes him formidable, if not insurmountable.
Well, a good friend of mine, Art Fisher, you know him as well, as a big supporter of the president, and he calls Trump the American Winston Churchill. That's what he thinks, American Winston Churchill. We'll see. We certainly need a great leader in moments like this, and I know that we have one in you. I can't thank you enough for your time, my good friend, and we look forward to having you back on the program real soon.
Thanks, KG. See you soon.
All right, hon.